Welcome to our 2024 season of the Cloud Industry Forum Presents TWF show. We're speaking to you live from our mixed reality newsroom experience produced by our friends here at Disruptive Live. This is our weekly video podcast where we interview a guest from our members or someone doing something cool in cloud technology or AI or transformation or someone with ideas about what might be coming next. I'm David Terrar. I'm the CEO of the Cloud Industry Forum, which is a not-for-profit trade body that champions and helps accelerate the adoption of cloud technology and services. If you want to find out more about us, we're at cloudindustryforum.org. I'm at DT on X, David_Terrar on Threads and Instagram, and easy to find on LinkedIn. Now, today's guest on TWF is someone I've known for around 20 years, someone who came into the technology space at the start of the shift to cloud and software as a service, and who has created and sold 2 successful product businesses, as well as some of the other really important initiatives he's done as well. We're going to get his perspective on the cloud space and being a serial entrepreneur. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Duane Jackson. Duane, welcome to the show. Please, can you introduce yourself and your company and what you do?
Hi, David. So Duane Jackson, soon to be unemployed. So I recently built and sold a company called Staffology to Iris Software Group, where I've been for the last 3 years. A long handover period, if you like.
Well, can we start by, that's already brought out questions that I'm going to ask you, but can we start by you explaining how you got into the tech space and some of what you've achieved so far, as well as Staffology?
Sure. So I started as a web developer in, probably the late 90s, really, but then really got into sort of my swing at 2003. Initially as a web developer for hire, and then sort of quickly spotted the opportunity to build a product, what we now call SaaS. Wasn't even a phrase at the time, more cloud. But yeah, quickly went from being a solo web developer to building web-based B2B software for other SMEs.
Excellent stuff. Now, I know the first product that you launched is Cashflow with a K, because I used to be one of your competitors back then. Tell us a bit more about that Cashflow, that first product. Why did you start it? And it's an accounting solution, so why did you choose that? And of course, as you rightly say, it was a cloud-based solution before we called them cloud. How did you get it off the ground?
I should take some credit and make up some story about how I had this foresight of the whole industry and where it was going, but it wasn't the case. So because I was a web developer, so I was typically programming stuff for the web for clients, and I needed something for myself to do my invoicing, because the options were Sage or QuickBooks, which these days those products and Xero and a whole bunch of others have got nice, easy to use interfaces. Back then it was very much accountant focused, very clunky, very difficult to use. I'd managed to raise an invoice, go back a month later to try again, and had completely forgotten how to use it. So I initially built what became Cashflow as a little product for me to use to manage my own invoicing. And it sat on the web because that's where I developed. And over a period of a few months, I realized I should be selling a product rather than my time by the hour. And that this was an obvious candidate for a product, because lots of other small businesses I was talking to were having the same problems I was having. They couldn't find something to do their accounting, or not even, they wouldn't even call it accounting, it's just your invoicing. So I then made that available to other small businesses, an invoicing solution, and gradually added bits and pieces to it. And over a period of a few years, it became a full-blown accounting system. I mean, once you get to P&L and balance sheet and various other stuff, you're accounting now rather than just invoicing or bookkeeping. So it was a slow process. I wouldn't want to be doing it now under the spotlight of everyone looking, but back then, it is a very new way of doing things, and had the space to mess up a few times and eventually evolve it into what was a successful product.
Excellent. Now, eventually, and you mentioned Iris, you actually eventually sold out to Iris and handed your baby over to someone else. What did that feel like when that happened, apart from the money side of things?
Yeah, so you say apart from money side of things, right? But that's the big thing, right? So at that point, I'd spent 10 years trying to build this business, largely trying to get financial security for me and my family. So my background's sort of well documented out there. I grew up in children's homes, left school, no qualifications, served time in prison, got out of prison with pretty much nothing when I started the business. So really, my goal was to get that financial security. And overnight, when you sell the business, someone goes, okay, well, there's everything you've been working for the last 10 years. And then the next day you don't have the same drive and focus that you have, because you've achieved it. So you have a bit of a what now moment. And James Ashford, Go Proposal, was talking about this on LinkedIn recently. That is, I mean, no one's got sympathy for the guy that's just made millions of pounds, right? But it's an interesting point in your life. And the whole letting go of the product and the business, I didn't have that emotional attachment to the company. And a lot of people at the time about letting go of your baby. No, my babies were at home. I've got 3 girls. I never saw the company as my baby, so I never really struggled on that side of things. I don't think it is more the what do I do with myself now, that the thing I've been getting up and working on for the last 10 years no longer needs me to work on it.
Interesting. In building it up from scratch like that, what were the kind of key lessons you learned in starting it and then growing it?
It really is all about the people. Even though we're a technology business, and you hear these phrases and cliches, but they're cliches for a reason, right? Because they are true. So yeah, I mean, it was really important to have a very good team around you that can do everything. Well, I was going to say everything you can't do, but also everything you can do, right? Because you're going to step away from that business at some point, whether because you want to sit back and let it run itself, or whether it's because you get acquired. So that was an important lesson, certainly, because for a whole period of time I tried to do everything myself, and that's just not scalable. And again, around systems and processes, you can't have everything in your head, so that all does need to be documented and written down, all the boring stuff. So yeah, I think that was the main things for me, is the realising all the cliches are cliches for a reason.
Okay, good. Are there any particular mistakes that you made that stick out?
Yeah, and it is around the people. So in 2010, I tried to sell the business, and was pretty convinced that I'd be able to pretty quickly, and then found out that wasn't the case after spending 6 months trying to sell it. And that was because of those mistakes, right? That it was me running the whole business, and people that are looking to acquire it are, okay, we're going to give you a load of money, hoping you turn up the next day. And if you don't turn up the next day for work, then who can run this business? So without having an exec team around you that are incentivized to carry on running the business, you don't really have anything, right? You have a job. Even if you have 30, 40 other people helping you, you own a job rather than a business. So that was a mistake, not building that team quickly enough, definitely. And I did have a stab at it early on, got burnt once, so was then reluctant to do it again. But again, it goes back to the cliches and the things that we hear all the time. So one of the phrases being hire slowly, fire quickly. And typically, as business owners, you do that the wrong way around. You hire very quickly, you get excited, and you take too long to get rid of people that aren't working out. So certainly made that mistake. But I do think with all of this stuff, you hear that, and until you make the mistakes yourself, and it's the same again with having children, right? You can tell them everything, but they need to make some mistakes themselves, and that's how you learn, really.
Absolutely. Now, you started and built cash flow, and then the second thing you worked on was Staffology. What triggered that idea, and following the same route to selling it to Iris?
So it was 2013 that I sold cash flow. So over the next few years, I've been involved in various things. So I started a charity where we're teaching prisoners how to program and help them get jobs in the industry on their release. But I was also advising a few other SaaS companies. And a few of them were looking specifically for web-based payroll with an API. And it just didn't exist at the time. So Xero had their UK payroll, which was half built at the time maybe, and with a bit of an API on it, but it certainly wasn't comprehensive. And speaking to Gary Turner at the time, who was running the UK business, it didn't sound like they were really focusing on payroll or the API, and it just wasn't suitable for what these companies like Crunch and Brief HR, where I was quite heavily involved, needed. And it was a running joke for a while that I should go off and build it, which I always dismissed, because I do remember after selling cash flow, one of the things I was very relieved about was never having to debug a VAT return again. So the idea of getting involved in sort of real hardcore legislative tech was not appealing. But then one fateful afternoon, 2018, towards the end of the year, I remember exactly where I was sitting with my laptop, thinking this whole payroll thing, surely it can't be as hard as everyone says. And I kind of looked up from my laptop about a year later and had built a full payroll solution, really gone down the rabbit hole and got obsessive and focused on it, on this whole idea of an API first payroll product. So you look at something like cash flow and lots of other applications, you bolt on an API because the developer community wants it, but it becomes a second class citizen. You add a new feature to your core product projects, for instance, and that's then not exposing the API. And it's low priority putting it in the API, right? Because you've got finite resources. So the way I was determined to build Staffology was API first. The UI that customers and users use talks to the application by the API. So it's technically impossible for it to do anything that the API doesn't support. So it then forces you to make the API first class citizen. And I really enjoyed that whole process of getting involved deep in the tech again and building that out. But I spent about 18 months, maybe nearly 2 years doing that, had the product in the market, proved the point that this same platform could work for very small director-only payrolls up to very big, complicated payrolls. But was also aware that there are at least 3 companies in the industry, Iris, Sage, Access, that all had multiple payroll products that are a pain in the ass to update every year. You've got multiple code bases you're having to update. So I built this in such a way that it would solve that problem for any of them. And obviously knew the guys at Iris already. So I spoke to them, and it just made a lot of sense for it to drop into Iris and solve some of the problems they had with maintaining their product and as a sort of trying to build a modern go forward cloud platform. It made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And part of that was, so I'd been on the sell side a few times. So I'd sold Cashflow. I'd been very involved in the sale of Breathe HR. Sold a small product called Subdate to CrowdCube, and I wanted to be more on the buy side. So I wanted to see that from that side of things. And I knew I could work in smaller companies. I was curious how these massive companies, or relatively massive companies, work. So I was keen to spend a bit of time at Iris this time rather than hand over the product and walk away.
Interesting. Oh, now that's 2 successful products, and I mean, we're talking about the last 20 years or so. So you've been around since the start of we started using the cloud term in 2007, and you've seen the industry kind of develop and grow over the last 2 decades. How do you think it's changed? How do you think it's developed?
It's a lot easier now to build products. So in the early days of Cashflow, I mean, the HTML and CSS for the user interface would have written from scratch. These days you have products like Bootstrap, Material, and various other frameworks you can pick up and use. And that's similar throughout the whole technology stack, not just the UI. We'd had physical servers that we had to go and visit if we needed to upgrade the RAM. Now you just use Azure or AWS. So there's been so many technology changes that make it a lot easier. There's also been other stuff that's evolved. So I do remember, if you remember 2007, 2008, and you talk to these bigger companies and some smaller companies that are trying to do cloud, the first question you'd always ask to get to the bottom of are you really cloud is, are they multi-tenant on the database? And it was almost gospel back then that if you didn't have a single database with all of your users in it, you weren't real SaaS. But actually now that's kind of changed. It's perfectly fine to have multiple databases, a separate database for each customer, as long as it's managed well, because that's often one of your bottlenecks. So a lot of what is SaaS has changed, and a lot of how we build it's changed, and it's continuing to do so as well, right?
Interesting. The other kind of thing that you've had to get over is when the pandemic hit us. So that was obviously when you were building up Staffology. How has living through the pandemic kind of changed your thinking at all? You think differently with this, what we've experienced since 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really accelerated the adoption of cloud software. So it made it more necessary for a lot of companies. So those that have been struggling and hadn't adopted it did very quickly. For me, it's worked well because I don't think if me selling Staffology to Iris meant I had to turn up at an office at 9 o'clock every day, I don't think I would have done it. So the fact that I could do it working from home was appealing. Where I do think it's difficult is for new people coming into the industry. into any industry, right? So us old timers that have been around and know what we're doing, it's fine. But for someone that's just starting in an industry and you pick up stuff just by being around other people, I think that's a lot harder to do with the whole working from home stuff. So it's good to see some of that reversing. But I think engineering is one of the last areas to sort of get back in the office, really, for obvious reasons. But we can do our job remotely pretty easily.
Tell us a bit more about some of the other things you got involved with. You kind of mentioned a couple of them in passing in an earlier answer.
So I got help to start my business from the Prince's Trust. So and had various mentors, formal and informal, and various people helped me buy the Prince's Trust as I was growing my business. So when I sold, I gave a lump of money back to the trust and actually became the first person to go from being a beneficiary of the trust to being a patron, which meant that the king goes around and tells my story quite often and gets aspects of it wrong, but no one ever corrects him. If you hear someone tell you that I started cash flow from a prison cell, you know where they heard it, right? And no one's correcting him. But so the Prince Trust do a great program called the Enterprise Program that I benefited from, and I was keen to see them deliver that in prisons because I think there are a lot of potential entrepreneurs in prison. But for various reasons, that wasn't high up on their agenda, and they weren't going in that direction. And then somebody called Michael Taylor got in touch with me that was looking to do something similar in prisons, in terms of teaching inmates how to code and helping them get jobs in the industry or setting up as one-man web developers. And he'd been to the MOJ, and the first thing the MOJ asked is Duane Jackson involved? In a good way, rather than if he's involved, we don't want to be near it. So he got in touch. So I got involved with that, and along with a fellow patron of Prince's Trust, Andrew Dixon, who put in a lot of money and time to get that off the ground, we set up Code 4000. And that worked very well. We worked in HMP Humber first, and we had a number of guys that went through the program and then got released into the community and either got jobs in the industry or a few of them set up their own web development agencies, which was really nice. But COVID didn't help with that. With the prisons going into lockdown, working with the MOJ or any government department is bloody hard. So that ended up, we rolled that up into Catch 22, which is a bigger organisation working with ex-offenders that have got more bandwidth and experience of dealing with government and getting this stuff working. So that continues, and that's been really nice. So yeah, there's that. Ended up writing a book. So the name Code 4000, I didn't realise it because Michael named it, came from my book, which was 4,000 Days, which was roughly how long from when I got out of prison to when I sold the business. So I'd done that pretty soon after selling the business, and that was an enjoyable process. Yeah, so I'm involved in lots of different things.
Excellent, Duane. Now, the other thing that we've just lived through is this last year when, 15 months really, when artificial intelligence kind of exploded with generative AI and ChatGPT and the whole kind of subject being democratized. I think that we're at an inflection point where things are going to be different going forwards because of all of that. Do you agree with that? And got any ideas on what might be happening next?
Yeah, I certainly agree with it. But I think if you look at technology over the last, I was going to say 20 years that I've been in the industry, but even beyond that, we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of new technologies and maybe underestimate the long-term impact. So hence the dot-com bubble, right? It went up like that very quickly because everyone thought it was going to change the world overnight. And it didn't. It did change the world, but it took a little bit longer. And I wonder if we're in the same place with AI. We think it's going to change stuff overnight and it might take a bit longer. But it is scary, right? When you look at it and the rate of changes and what it can do. In fact, I was with somebody yesterday that had sort of heard about it, but not really seen it in action. So I showed him on my phone. He's completely blown away. And then showed DALL-E with image generation as well. But I really struggle to work out how I can use that in the stuff that I do. And I do feel now like the old guy in the room with this new technology that I'm struggling to get my head around and understand and see uses for it. But what's interesting in the generative AI stuff, right? So it's built on these large language models that's built from all this content from the web. But going forward from sort of 2023, 24 onwards, a lot of the content on the web is going to be AI generated. So future LLMs are going to need to know how to distinguish from stuff its predecessors built, because if it ingests that, then it's cannibalism, right? And they've already seen that when you build LLMs based on AI generated content, they become totally useless. So I was recently at Business of Software conference that's in Cambridge and in the US, a really great conference. And someone gave a talk there under the pretense that they'd come back from the future and was looking at stuff we could do differently. And he said, oh, the reason he's come back to 2024 was it's the last year that they can reliably put up a simulation of what the world was like, because from 2025 onwards, everything was polluted with AI generated content, which was a scary thought, really.
Fascinating. You're just about to leave Iris. What's next for you?
I'm still kicking around so many ideas. I know I can't put up my feet and relax. I'm no good at golf, and I enjoy working on products. And I'm not sure whether it's true, because I've told myself it so many times that I don't just want to start on something from scratch again, or from a blank page, because that getting from literally nothing to your first 100K of revenue or your first handful of customers is the really hard part. So there's a few companies I'm talking to that have got past that stage and are looking to grow to the next level where I can be useful and helpful. So I might get involved with one or more of those. But having said that, I think the reality is I'll probably end up building another product again, because I still see lots of opportunities, whether it's API first HR, whether it's doing stuff in the payroll space again at some point, API first accounting. I think there's opportunities there. I think you look at Xero, they've drifted towards the accountant advisor audience, and I still think there's a big market for the owner operator, the SME, for a dumbed down, for want of a better phrase, accounting application. So lots of ideas, and I need to really find the time and space to focus and make a decision. At the moment, I'm still at Iris until the end of the month, and my problem is I can't do things half-heartedly. So while I'm here, I'm very focused on what I'm doing with and for Iris, which is scaling up Staffology, so we can put 50,000 and 70,000 employee pay runs on it, because it's gaining adoption very, very quickly. So I can't really focus on what I'm doing next until I'm out. So yeah, ask me in a few months. Hopefully I have a more articulate answer.
We will definitely do that. Excellent, Duane. Last two questions. What's your best piece of advice for the budding entrepreneurs out there in our audience from what you've learned?
So I speak to so many people that are thinking of businesses or researching ideas and planning stuff. And I read something yesterday on Twitter that really sort of summarized my thinking on some of those conversations, which is somewhere out there is somebody that knows far less than you doing what you're planning to do. So yeah, spend less time planning and researching, and take action, get started, because it's not until you actually get started that you really start learning stuff. So going back to you need to make your own mistakes. You can hear about them all you like. So yeah, you need to get out there and start taking action, doing stuff. So one company I spoke to yesterday, early stage, they've been kicking it around for ages, doing all the research for what they're going to do. And I said, look, if you had a customer now, could you service them? Because it's a service-based business. Well, yeah, we could. And I was like, okay, so set yourself a date, get your first customer. And that seems to be a bit of an eye-opener for them, that, look, you need to get a customer, and that's when you really start your real learnings, and that's when you start. So yeah, take action is the two-word shorter version of my answer.
Awesome. Well, last question, which is, if people want to find out more, obviously you're on LinkedIn. Obviously, you mentioned your book, 4,000 Days. They should search that out. Is there anything else that they should look for to follow what you do?
I'm fairly active on Twitter, and as you know from following me for the last 20 years, once I do start something new, I'm noisy about it. So I think you won't be able to miss it if I do start something new. It'll be all over Twitter, all over LinkedIn, and wherever else I can. But yeah, if anyone's welcome to email me as well, Duane at ukstartups.com. I always say, if you've got someone's email address, you can ask them anything you want. Just be very specific with your ask and short and sweet. And yeah, so anyone that's got questions, I'm more than happy to give any advice where I can.
Well, that's been fantastic having you on the show, Duane. I mean, your story is inspirational, and you've given us loads of practical advice. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you were inspired by Duane's story and what he's achieved with his software as a service successes. I definitely recommend that you follow what he does next. I'm really intrigued as to what he ends up doing. Check out his book, 4,000 Days. I'm glad he slipped that in and talked about that as well. We'll be back live next Wednesday at 14:30 UK time. We want your feedback, we want your suggestions. Maybe you want to come and be a guest on the show. Put some comments here in LinkedIn around the show, or email us at info@cloudindustryforum.org. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you see us next week or next time.